Okay, so you look good. The camera's rolling, so go ahead
Okay.
and let's do your introduction.
All right, Maria Lateef from Bethel Middle School, 6th grade social studies, a lesson on China.
Good. Boarding. Okay, first question. We want to understand the decisions. Bleh. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
So the decisions made prior to this lesson was really taking in concept of what are the students really learning. So not only the content objective, but also the CCSS. So what skills was I going to teach the students? And the content-wise, we teach ancient civilization. But to really make it authentic for the students, we look at ancient China as well as modern China and how history often repeats itself or the impact it's had over time. So we looked at, the content standards of what do they really need to know about China? What really matters for them to understand where they're living in the world around them? And then the skills. What skills, according to the CCSS, will I be addressing? And the skills I looked at this time were where we were in the year was, are they making a great claim? What are they using relevant evidence? And can they justify it and really explain their evidence? And picking the text. How did I go about picking the text is really difficult because they're 6th grade students. And the topic, it's not easy for them to comprehend. It's really difficult and it's challenging. So I looked at the text that we were going to be using and I modified a few from CNN articles as well as some primary sources from like ancient China that were translated, and then we did a lot of activities. The lesson prior to this lesson being videotaped required the students to really understand what the words meant in the articles. So we devoted a day on each of the primary sources or secondary sources. Students annotated the reading. They looked at what the words meant and how those words were used in the text to really get a good understanding of what the text was stating. So those all lessons and skills were previously taught for allowing us to have a great lesson or debate or in the future. Okay, I don't know. Is that good?
Yeah, good. You're doing good. Okay, continuing on that, discuss the sequence of lessons that surround this one lesson.
Okay, so the sequence of lessons that surround this one lesson, we started off with introducing ancient times, ancient China. We looked at the concept of ancient leadership and how leaders had to violate people's rights in order to build a nation, an empire. And we looked at Shi Huangdi in particular and how he killed innocent people, how he built the Great Wall, and we looked at the pros and the cons of the Great Wall. And we looked at the pros and the cons of burning books by Confucius and why those actions were taken. Then after that, we looked at modern day China and how often steps repeat themselves, and they looked at modern day China and censorship and why the government was really, justified in censoring the internet and why the people feel that they were not justified. So we looked at different perspectives. Then we went about it and we looked at another issue in modern day China, one-child policy. We looked at the positive impact as well as the negative impact. The students, rose a question about what's good for the nation versus the good of an individual. And is it good to give up our rights to be good citizens, to really do what's good for our nation rather than just one? And they've really been thinking about it. They had to come up with evidence. And so often students look at the ethical approach of, killing is wrong no matter what. And then questioning themselves of, well, the government is placing an action, but it's good for everybody else, such as the one-child policy. So, rather than them just looking at the emotional, which very often they do, it forced them to look at two perspectives. And that was a skill that we were aiming for was, do they really understand a perspective? And can they build using evidence to justify why they feel that way?
Is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of text designed to build skills and knowledge? If so, give an example of other texts that form this sequence.
The texts used in this lesson were actually 3 different texts used, and they were from previous lessons the students had annotated. And during this lesson, the students really dwelled into the text by looking at what content was presented and how it supported their claim. For example, the Shi Huangdi primary source that they had, they looked at the Great Wall And in the article, it talked about 1,000 people had died. So then the students looked further and read modern day texts, and they also talked about recent actions taken by the government and how they were justified. So the text, really allowed students to build on one another and make inferences across time. So the ancient texts, then they looked at the, more modern, and they looked at the trends over time and the actions taken in order to really understand the topic.
Talk about the standards targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
The standards that was addressed in this one was the literacy one of students being able to interpret, videos and graphs and visuals, as well as the writing, and really allowing the students to write a great claim and relevant evidence. And another standard that was addressed was the speaking and listening, allowing students to have academic conversations that build on prior knowledge and discussion. I felt that the lesson really did embrace those concepts and skills and address those standards. And I feel that the students were really dwelled and focused and read the text for a meaning and for a purpose. They knew what they were looking for. They referred to the text, even though it was complex. They went back to it and made inferences about how one of the students had stated about how Egypt's uprising was an issue, why China censors issues today. And that wasn't clearly, in the text, but it was implied. So you had to read and really understand it. So I felt like the standards that I was looking to address were fully addressed because students made relevant claims. They brought relevant evidence to support their claims and justified their responses. Their academic conversations, encouraging them to, have discussions, but also the concepts involved in an academic conversation, the active listening, eye contact, paraphrasing, and building on conversations. And students will be doing a writing response, which will allow me to assess that as well.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies, and why?
I feel like the core action 1 as well as 2, and it could be 3 as well, all 3 of them are really well addressed. The first one, which tells them to build content knowledge. And I felt this lesson really did allow the students to not only know about the information, but to own it, to really understand what it means and build on it, make connections, and see what history is all about, which is the trends and over time. With the core action 2 is really looking into the text and understanding what it is and using evidence to guide their reasoning and their claim. And the students had to, we've been teaching them all year, it's not about what you have to say, you have to use evidence to support your claim and your reason no matter what you do in life. So I felt that that was addressed. And the third, looking at building vocabulary. The students' vocabulary throughout this unit and just this particular lesson is really improved. They used words such as activist, and those are, not common words for 6th graders. So one of the things that we did is we read and annotated where students were required to look up any vocabulary word they were unsure of. And through this process, I've heard them using Draconian laws or human activist or, just even a simple word as being implied and knowing what those words mean, and advocate. So I have seen a great use of vocabulary, and I'm hoping that they encourage to use those throughout the year.
We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instruction. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
The CCSS shifts really focus on allowing teachers and students to use evidence and text, and really focus on what text they use as well as how relevant it would be to the content. I feel like the lesson really fits well with the CCSS standards because it encourages teachers to look at the text being presented and asking ourselves, what is the purpose? So rather than just giving any reading, the reading selected for the lesson really, there was thought and process involved in them. What was the purpose? What were the students really going to get out of it? And then creating text-dependent questions for each of the readings to allow students to go back to the text and figure out what does it really mean. So the lesson really focuses on the shifts because it's encouraging students to use text-dependent questioning techniques and the text to justify their responses, as well as the speaking and listening, which is really important because it's very easy for students to talk about something, but having an academic conversation, it really embraces the full concept of do they really understand what they're talking about, and encourages them to question each other and ask each other where the information is coming from.
Let me pause for a minute. How did you teach the content of this lesson or this text prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
A few years ago, actually, I was thinking about it. A few years ago, when I taught China, we didn't necessarily look at modern day. We just taught, here was Shi Hongdi. He built the Great Wall. Why did he do it? And we looked at it as what was his purpose, and we used the textbook a lot rather than really looking for sources outside the textbook. We were really textbook dependent, and I feel like the shift has really pushed me into the side where they want me to explore, be creative, and look at what's relevant outside the textbook and how those texts could be used and make learning authentic for the students.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensure that all students have the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did you support all students in working with grade level text? For example, how did you provide scaffolding for students below grade level so they can read grade level text?
Throughout this lesson, each day was devoted to really understanding each text because there were 3 different texts. And making learning engaging for students is really important because for students to want to learn, they have to be engaged. And I felt like that was everything to do with the topic. Having the topic, is the government ever justified, and then focusing in on China and looking at government in general over time really engaged the students because they love to share their opinions. They love to talk about how they feel, especially when it comes to their rights. They feel like they have the right to do everything. So I felt like this lesson engaged the students because they learned that everywhere in the world is not the same. Yes, in the United States you have freedom. You have freedom to, speak and do what you want. But other countries is different, and the government has their reasoning. So the students were really engaged because they felt like it was real. It wasn't just looking at ancient times. It was looking at ancient and making modern day connections. So I felt like the topic itself was really important to be engaging rather than just looking at the textbook and reading. The shift has really pushed me to be creative as a teacher and make authentic learning happening for the students, and that I did enjoy, and I felt like all students were held responsible. So throughout the unit, what I did was there were some students who really do have difficult time reading the text, so I did small group instruction. I created groups based on reading ability, and I looked at different reading scores that we have in our district to allow those groupings to occur. I met with students who are below grade level, and I led that group. I read with them, I annotated, we figured out what things meant. I did the Fisher frame model. I did the gradual release model where the students, I led them and then I had them work as a group and then they tried it independently. And then I assessed their work to see if they really understood what the reading meant by the text-dependent questions I had given them. That allowed me to really work with the students who were struggling and allow those students who weren't to kind of explore and really go work on their own.
How did you create opportunities for students who are advanced to engage more deeply?
The students who are advanced, I allowed them to actually use, we have a bring your own technology to school. I allowed them to research further what they were reading about. For example, one of the readings had to do with censorship in China, and a student read about Chen, who was one of the human rights activists mentioned in the article. So our students who were, above grade level in reading, they wanted to know more about why was he blocked and censored his information about him. So they were able to research him and figure out what did he really do and why did the government censor it, to build on their knowledge about what was being presented in the article. So those students were limited, they weren't limited to what was only being given to them. They were allowed to use their technology and the resources around them to investigate further. For example, another group of 6 students really wanted to Skype with a woman in China, and they put together the video where they Skyped with a woman in China and found out more about the one-child policy.
How do you know the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions in tasks with precision?
Each lesson that had been assigned prior to this lesson had a reading and then it had text-dependent questions. To know that, sorry, I'm going to reset that one.
Do you want to start?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In order to assess students and know that they have met and understand the content being addressed, what I did was I looked at the text-dependent questions given, and then in small groups I would be able to rotate around groups and look at what they wrote. I did give them responses they had to answer, short writing responses that I graded, and gave back to the students, and then the kids that didn't really understand it, I had them come out. I did a pull-out group, and I worked with those small groups to help them really understand the readings. So giving them, short answers allowed me to see they understood it, as well as their discussion. So as I monitored the student discussions, if they were struggling and they made brief, didn't really elaborate on their responses, that showed me that they didn't really understand beyond what was given in the text. And then I was able to work with them and offer extra help.
Did students acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson?
The students did acquire the literacy skills addressed in the lesson, because part of the skills that were being addressed, that they were able to interpret and integrate visual as well as graphs, and the students had to analyze each of those, information that were presented in order to really understand the content to be able to discuss it with another. So throughout their discussion as well as their written work, I was able to see that they understood it.
What did you do for students who did not acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson?
As well, throughout the lesson, I did do small group, and now going forward, when I see their writing assignment, I will be working with those groups and those pulling out each of those individual students and doing small group interventions, where I will do tier 1 or tier 2 interventions at this point if they didn't get it. Having those students look at what are they struggling with? When once we figure out what they struggled with, working with those students to help overcome the challenge, maybe reading with them and different strategies.
2 more questions.
Okay.
Great instructors are continuously learning. Oh, you know what? Sorry. Let's move back here. Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson? And what actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
Can I pause for 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I have the right core
no
action
worries.
before.
Okay, I'll read it again. Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson, and what actions have you taken to make that happen?
I feel like the student actions that were best exemplified were the students' ability to make a claim using relevant evidence. And this is all, been an all year long process we've been working on since September, and we've been really focused on it doesn't matter what you have to say, you have to back it up by evidence. And that's what I've been teaching the kids. And it's not, I tell them I care about you, but your opinion won't matter unless you have something to back it up with. So I feel like they've really started to own up and make claims based on relevant evidence.
Great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked well and what might you do differently?
Looking at, celebrations of a lesson as I sit back and reflect, I really enjoyed how students did build on their claim. I was really proud of them in explaining and really being passionate about what they were saying and asking each other questions and, looking at evidence and not just opinions and not using I thinks rather than they were using, according to the text. And I was really proud of them because when they first came in September, it was all I think, and now they're getting to the point where they are starting to cite evidence and they're really making claims, but they're passionate about their own claims. And as I look as a teacher where we are in the year, where I go forward from here and what I would do differently, I would like, because it's early still in the year, in the future, I would like to assign roles. So not only would they be part of the government, they would be a position in the government, whether they would be maybe a UN ambassador, or they would be a Chinese citizen, or they would be a girl from the orphanage who was left in. So I would really like to allow that to happen in the future, maybe with a future debate, is give roles within the perspective, so allowing them to now having to justify using a perspective and more.
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
I don't think there were any behaviors to be concerned about, unexpected behaviors of the students. I know that students were a little bit nervous. They were on the camera for the first time, and it was, okay, in the snow, with the weather, and they didn't know if it was going to happen or not. Some of them felt a little bit unprepared or not underdressed. So, but I think that it is what it is, and they're kids, and they have to learn, and that's how they're going to learn. It was great.
How did you feel with the debate? Did anything come up for you when you were listening to them debate?
as I observed them debating, I really would, a couple of key points that I had made on their rubrics was, go build on each other's comments. Don't randomly make a statement just to get a statement out there. I would encourage some people that did get into the circle, that didn't get a chance to talk, well, you have to make a statement. Don't be so quick to leave. What are you trying to say? Don't make a statement and say, okay, I made my, I said something and now I'm out of here. No, build on it. What did you mean by that? So that's something I would encourage them to do is just relax and tell us how you feel and explain. And that would be our next focus now as we move forward is now explaining your evidence rather than just saying it. What do you mean by it?
Was there, on any of the 3 topics during the debate, were you surprised to hear one of the students'
comments or
was there anyone in particular?
Yeah, one of the students, actually, a couple of them had made great comments, and I was really shocked because I was like, whoa, I didn't know that you would have made that inference, or, because I didn't state that, with one of the students who said, well, the good of the nation versus the good of a few, and that concept is not very common for 6th graders. So, he must have done some further research or read more about it, because it was great to hear that. And I was really pleased with another student who had said, he looked at it and he said, well, they're not censoring everything. And he was correcting information. And it was really good to see that, because that doesn't happen often, that they go ahead and they read further or they correct each other, but in a very nice and polite manner, that it wasn't putting anybody down.
Great, you're done.
That's it.
Thank you. Nice work.